Fine.
Awesome. And we're live. Welcome to another Terraform Thursday, straight from Amsterdam, New York, and Hamburg to your screen. My name is Kerim Satirli. I'm a developer advocate at HashiCorp, and I'm joined today by Sebastian Korfmann and Daniel Dreier. Thank you for being here today, you two.
Thanks, Kerim. I'm really excited to be here. This is really cool.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here.
So before we dive in, because we have a lot to cover today, just a quick reminder, if you're new to our community office hours, we have a couple of guidelines. Nothing super special other than we're asking you to be a nice and kind person. So be welcoming, inclusive, and friendly, considerate and respectful. Pretty much, do things that wouldn't make your parents proud, and don't make a fool of yourself. If you need the longer version of these guidelines, go to hashicorp.com/community-guidelines and read along. So as I said, I'm joined today by Sebastian Korfmann, Senior Software Engineer for CDK for Terraform, and Daniel Dreier, Engineering Manager for CDK for Terraform and Terraform Core. Thank you again for being here. Sebastian, let's start with you. What do you do at HashiCorp?
Yeah, so, as the title suggests, so I'm a software engineer, and I joined recently as a full-time engineer for the CDK for Terraform team. But I was actually starting out last year, so it started as an open source collaboration and then sort of turned into this bigger project here at HashiCorp. And so I'm really glad to be here and that, well, I'm able to work on this. Yeah.
Very nice. That is a quite interesting path. So you started contributing to the project and then got hired. I like that. That's a good progression. Let's see if we have some time to talk about that later. Daniel, same question for you. What do you do as an engineering manager?
So I am the engineering manager for the CDK for Terraform team and for Terraform Core. I have been here for a year and a half now. I had just been managing the Terraform Core team, which was incredibly exciting. And then when the opportunity came along to build this team up, hire Sebastian, we've actually hired 2 more folks who will be starting in the next 2 months. So I hope they will be able to join in a future one of these. When that opportunity came along, I was really stoked and jumped on that. So yeah, as the engineering manager, I am on this team. I'm actually fairly involved on sort of the product side. So right now, Sebastian and I are originating roadmap plans, direction, that kind of thing. Day to day, I'm pretty hands off. I'm not reviewing Sebastian's every pull request. Once the team is staffed up, that will be even easier. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Recently, it's all, as you well know, it's all reviews these few weeks.
Engineering manager that doesn't review every pull request you make. That sounds nice. Where were you 5 years ago?
I think 5 years ago, they actually needed that.
Yeah, I recognize that. So I'm curious, for the people that are just joining us, what is Terraform? What is CDK for Terraform? Sebastian, maybe.
Yeah. So CDK for Terraform is essentially like programming language abstractions for Terraform configurations. So it enables, practitioners who want, or like who are used to be in a setting like TypeScript. They are writing TypeScript apps, Java apps, C# apps, Python apps, whatever it is in the end. And they have to touch infrastructure every once in a while. And so they're not really used to write HCL or to use HCL. And for these kind of practitioners, it's like one way to handle infrastructure. So it enables you to stay in your programming language ecosystem. So whatever you're using, so this includes the entire tooling for your programming language, which are used to like handling dependencies, stuff like this. And then on the other hand, it's like for really advanced use cases and like complex use cases where traditional HCL wouldn't really cut it for some reason, and you need the dynamic way to provision infrastructure and to generate your configuration. So what it does on a high level is really we are still using the Terraform core CLI. So it's really an abstraction, like a layer on top of Terraform core. So therefore, it's under the hood still generating HCL compatible JSON, which is then being used for the Terraform CLI to actually deploy your things. So when you use CDK for Terraform, it's still, well, you're not leaving the ecosystem. It's like one component of the Terraform ecosystem, essentially.
And that's nice. I like that. So sticking around in the ecosystem, but getting essentially supercharged tools that might align more with my current workflow without having to use and learn HCL.
Yeah, pretty much, yes. And so it's like CDK itself, it's like the cloud development kit, and that's one project which originates at AWS. And so there's an AWS CDK, and so we are leveraging some tools which they've written. And so it's like a small ecosystem on its own. It's like so CDK for Terraform is sort of like overlapping between the Terraform platform and the CDK platform. So it's like the best of both worlds, basically.
That sounds good. I'm curious about that. So what does the interoperability look like between the two? Can I bring my existing Terraform modules? I've got a few really good ones. I promise I'd like to use them. Does that work with TypeScript?
Yes, as a matter of fact. So far, like prior to the current release, which was just cut like a few minutes ago, and prior to this, you were limited in terms of using modules from the Terraform registry only. So you wouldn't be able to use it from your local file system or from GitHub or from any other source which is supported. So we just changed this so that the support got improved and got broader. And essentially, you can use pretty much all modules which you already have. In TypeScript and Java in all the languages which are supported. And so
I like that. Yeah. So if I have an engineering team that's super good at writing HCL code, but a different engineering team isn't, they could still work together by essentially using each other's work.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think that's one of the really major use cases for this. So where you'd have like some sort of central infrastructure team, which has probably already has a bunch of infrastructure components, and they want to distribute this within the organization somehow, right? So they have product teams which are nowadays more and more shifting towards managing their own infrastructure, but you still want to ensure that you have certain guidelines and you have like a few constraints in place, and and I think you can totally achieve this with pure Terraform and pure HCL and modules. But again, and then you're coming to this platform language thing where product teams likely are not used to HCL. So you could either use CDK for Terraform only to provision or to distribute your infrastructure modules within the organization, but you could also use a hybrid approach so that you generate both. So I actually did an example where you can take like a single repository, like a single code base, and generate like a Terraform module and a CDK for Terraform package out of the same code base. And so this would just work and could be leveraged by like some central infrastructure team.
I like the interoperability and just the chance of bringing people together and working on them with the right tool for the right job. And that's, to me, what it sounds like. And I think that's, it makes sense for the right workflow. So that's definitely a good thing. You were mentioning a couple of different languages. I'm curious, if I want to use CDK for Terraform, what languages can I use with that?
So at the moment, so the language is like the major language which drives all the other implementations is TypeScript. And based from the TypeScript implementations, we do support Java, Python, and C#, so like the .NET ecosystem at the moment. There is some work going on by AWS itself, where they extend the support for the CDK ecosystem towards Golang. So it's pretty early, pretty alpha at the moment, but it's on the horizon and it's coming at some point. And yeah, but at the moment it's like really 4 languages which we do support.
Which is quite a nice collection. So let's talk a little bit about, I think 0.2 was released. No, sorry, it's going to be released pretty soon.
It was released.
Bad show notes. I see what happened here.
Yeah, it was
because I remember looking at the milestone and the milestone wasn't closed.
Yeah, it was
Happens.
close to the like I don't know, like an hour ago or so.
Fresh, really hot off the presses. So that's the release you were referring to. Got it. Awesome. What's new in 0.2?
First and foremost, it's really the module support, which got quite some attention in this release. As I said, like going from supporting the registry only towards like a more robust implementation where we support all possible sources which are supported by Terraform Core. So that was like a big thing. Then we did do some housekeeping, upgrading things, improving like a few things. We actually did enable publishing the packages to Central Maven and NuGet.org. So prior to this, we were only publishing to GitHub packages, which was from the user's point of view not really ideal, since you had to sign in, and so it was like quite complicated to consume these packages. But with that was one of the bigger challenges as well. So to enable easy consumption of the packages which we are providing, and then like a bunch of bug fixes, a bunch of smaller improvements here and there. So yeah, it's quite a lot of things which we tackled there.
Lots and lots of good changes. I like it. Being able to publish to a different registry is useful, especially if it's mostly automated.
Yeah, and it's really surprising how much effort it is to get something that's up and running. In particular, in the Central Maven ecosystem, it's funny. Yeah, but yeah, it took way longer than expected, and not really because it's complex. It's just like technically complex. It's really from an organizational point of view, it's really complex to get this up and running. So it includes Jira and opening Jira tickets, and so it's wouldn't really have expected this.
Daniel, I saw you chuckle when we talked about Maven. Sounds like there's an engineering story there.
Oh, I mean, I don't want to, it was interesting to see the different idiom between the Java world and the NPM world, because I went and registered accounts for, different repositories, and getting NPM up is absolutely idiomatic to the web world, where you pointy click your way through a simple interface and get registered, and easy peasy, all done. And then getting the Maven repository set up. I've been a Java dev in the past, and so it was familiar enough, but I sort of chuckled at the amount of additional complexity that Java devs are comfortable with. That is just idiomatic to the Java ecosystem. I went into this. I'm like, oh yeah, I actually have to figure out how does Maven work and how does OSS RH, I think it's called, hosting work. And then you have to file a Jira ticket with their Jira to ask for an account. It works. It's fine. It was. It's just I think it speaks to the large set. One of the things I find interesting about this project is, in Terraform core, because we issue HCL, we sort of get to decide to a large degree what is idiomatic. And in CDK for Terraform, we're very much playing in other people's playgrounds. And so the way CDK for Terraform works has to be idiomatic to Java, has to be idiomatic to Python, has to be idiomatic to TypeScript, to C#. And that means meeting folks where they're at in terms of, the native package management for all of those languages.
This sounds actually, as a practitioner, I like this, because if you figure this out, it means I don't have to, and that saves me time, which means I can rely more on my tools. So I'm super happy about that. We got a question in the chat, which I'm gonna ask in a second. If you're just joining, feel free to ask us questions. We're here with Sebastian and Daniel from the CDK for Terraform team. You can ask any questions that you have that are relevant to CDK or musical taste, and we'll try to get them answered. So, Sebastian, what maturity level would you say CDK for Terraform is?
It's still really an early stage project, right? So it's explicitly marked as experimental, and so we just, like with releasing Order 2, we just did like a few little breaking changes, and there are likely plenty more to come. So it's an early project, and so what we are looking for is really adventurous users who like to experiment and try new things and provide feedback. And I think that's what will help us most at the moment, right? So like we are really keen on feedback from actual users, and so to drive the product forward.
This is a theme that comes back a lot on our community office hours. We look and solicit a lot of feedback. How can people give you feedback on CDK for Terraform?
I think there are two major channels, right? Like, what, Danny, do you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually going to jump back. I want to talk a little bit more about maturity level, if you don't mind, because I think it's worth talking about what our intent is there. So a few months back, before Sebastian got hired here, the project was explicitly totally an experiment, and it was in pilot mode to figure out, is this a thing that it was in incubation is the right word. And we're done incubating it. We've figured out that this is a thing that is a good idea. The experiment has been proved out. People are interested. And the general direction is right. And now we need to get from that incubation stage to something that is stable enough to use. And is it stable enough to use? I mean, we have identified a handful of users who are using it live for real in production, but every major release, there are substantial changes, and there's a lot. And as we make those releases, people will have to refactor their code to stay on top of it. And so it's something that we're generally not recommending, certainly for someone who's like established Terraform commercial user. If you're a conservative use case here, don't use it. There's no commercial support for it, all of that. And our goal is to stabilize it. I don't want to give an exact time frame, but a lot of the stuff we're prioritizing is pulling forward those sort of breaking changes, stabilization items, to get to a point where it won't be as mature as Terraform core that's been in development for years, for some time, but to get to a point of stability.
Stability is obviously important, but at this point, it is very new. So you have the freedom to release a lot and release a solid number of good changes, which I think is great, because this kind of sounds like if I run into a bug, I lodge an issue, give you feedback, I might not have to wait 3 months to get a fix of that implemented.
Absolutely.
In the best case, yes. So
yeah, go ahead, Sebastian.
So in the best case, yes, I would absolutely agree. So so usually, although we try to be sort of on top of the GitHub issues, it's not always possible, but yeah, and if there's like really, usually you find a workaround for issues that users have. But if there's not really a workaround which is feasible, then yeah, I would say there's like, it's very likely that we will provide a fix rather soon.
I like that. So in the meantime, I got a question. How does the typical workflow differ when using CDK for Terraform instead of Terraform and HCL? Just on a high level. I'm doing this as a lead-in because I'm going to put you on the spot later and ask for an actual demo so we can go through some code.
Well, on a high level, so we do provide like our own CLI, which for the apply and diff commands, it's just deferring to Terraform core, but like we do provide our own CLI, which sort of drives the workflows which we have, right? So for the major cloud providers, we do provide pre-built packages for the native languages, like for TypeScript or for Python, for example, which you can just install your package manager and then start using the type bindings for example, for AWS or for Google or for Azure. And so that's, well, if you want using one of these, that's usually like a good entry point to use these providers. There's a way to generate your own packages, like for providers which you don't provide as a pre-built provider, for example, or for modules, or for like local providers for stuff like this. And this is using the exact same thing which we use for building the pre-built packages. And then you just have your CDK for Terraform app. And one important step is to actually synthesize your configuration which you have, like your application, down to JSON, like to the HCI compatible JSON. And from there on, Terraform kicks in and does the deployment or like the diffing and stuff. So it's like, in the end, it's like similar, but on a high level, it's quite similar to the existing Terraform workflows. It's just wrapped in another CLI, essentially. And you can still fall back to the Terraform CLI as well. So we do nothing special. So when you have your synthesized JSON, you can totally use this as your base for deployment. Yeah, so you can just use it with the plain Terraform CLI as well.
Got it. I think we've figured out this part nicely now, because that really sounds like, rather than departing from the Terraform ecosystem, I can essentially switch on turbo mode to do certain things in languages that I feel more comfortable with, while still having the ability to use HCL whenever I really need to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, you could use HCL. Yeah, that's possible. Just a bit difficulty at the end. What it also support is like a Terraform cloud workflow. So where you are not really using any Terraform locally at all. So you just delegate this to the Terraform cloud. And I think that's similar to the Terraform CI as well. So they do something similar. And yeah, so that's also like one way to use Terraform.
And so when I have Terraform Cloud, I can easily collaborate with my colleagues, which I think is nice, given that pretty much none of us are in the same office right now. I like that. So we've got a solid amount of theory in. I'm curious, would any of you like to share some code and walk us through the principles?
Let me share my screen.
People are already calling for a demo, so that's always good. And if you're just joining us, we're here with the CDK for Terraform team. If you have questions, Daniel, I'm going to ask you about your musical taste in a second, because that did come up. But if you have questions about the demo, definitely ask them. We'll try to answer them. Keep in mind, live demos, sometimes things go wrong, but we'll do our best to not crash everything. Can you zoom in a little on your code, Sebastian?
Yeah, sure.
And while you do that,
is that better?
Daniel, one more, and then I think we're good.
Okay.
And before we jump into that, Daniel, what's your morning song? What's one track that you listen to in the morning to get hyped up for the day?
Oh my goodness. I think this morning, to be honest, I listened to a bunch of Otis Redding. I couldn't tell you what I listened to, but whatever Spotify brought up for Otis Redding.
It's a beautiful morning if you started off like that. So, you can't really go wrong with any of those. So let me see. If you're in the chat and the font size is too low, let us know and we'll get it fixed. But I think it looks good. I'm having a look on YouTube as well. It looks clear to me.
Yeah, cool. So for some context, so we are just in the Terraform CDK repository here. And so we do have like a bunch of examples for different languages like C#, Java, Python. Most of them were actually contributed by community, so which is quite great. And so we have here like a TypeScript example where for simplicity reasons, we just use the Docker provider here. So and usually, well, the project looks pretty much like the first step which you usually would do is like in CDKTF init, where you choose the language and for example TypeScript, and then this would generate like the initial project with like a bunch of configuration and where you just have something to get going. So that's nothing we have to do right now. But this would generate the CDKTF JSON file where we have populated like the Terraform provider. So this is like this file which we use for our configuration purposes, which providers and modules we want to install or like to generate, right? In this case, we are using the Docker provider. So I'm not really sure if that's the most recent one, probably not. But here we're using the 2.0, like the 2 major version of the Docker provider. And when we do this, the next step after init is usually, and after init and setting up the configuration is usually like doing like a CDKTF get, which will go and generate the modules and providers. In this case, it's rather quick. And what this is really doing is, so we see here like a bunch of TypeScript files, and that's essentially the TypeScript bindings for the Docker provider in this case, right? So we see like a bunch of resources, and each resource of the Docker provider will be like reside essentially in one class, which we then can use to initialize our resources in our stack, right? So like that's all auto-generated here, and yeah, so that's what we're using in this project. And the actual project that we are using is this. So mostly, well, the import statements are usually auto-generated, and that's where it gets interesting. So we do have like a container, we do have an image, we have a Docker provider here. So we just start out by initializing the stuff, having like our stack here, which is sort of like one Terraform configuration. At the moment, we only support one stack. There's a ticket or like there's an issue to provide multiple stacks at the same time. So they could separate your Terraform states. But yeah, for simplicity reasons, at the moment, it's only one, which makes our life like a bit easier. And yeah, and then in this application, which we have like application is essentially just a container, right? It's like a container for your various stacks, where we only support one at the moment. And then you see the synt command, which is when we CDKTF synt. This is a step which I mentioned before this, where we take our application, in this case, it's a TypeScript application, and synthesize
interruption,
it.
I think you switched to your terminal, and that's not shared through your window.
Oh,
it's
really?
It's a beauty of Zoom. Technical troubles like that always happen.
Hang on, I will share again.
If you do a quick reshare, yeah. One thing that really stands out to me is that I like that you're using the Docker provider, because that means all the operations essentially happen locally, right? Like I can experiment, I can throw away containers. Well, I should first, obviously create them before throwing them away, but
yes,
it doesn't cost me anything while I'm experimenting. I like that. Getting your feet wet without having a chance to drown.
Yeah, and yeah, in particular, you don't have to deal with credentials. That's always like a bit. It distracts usually. But now you can see my terminal, right?
Looks beautiful.
Very
colors.
Good. Yes. So I did do the CDKTF sync command, and as you can see, well, it did do something in CDKTF out, and that's actually like the JSON compatible, the HCL compatible JSON, which I mentioned before, right? So a bunch of metadata which is not relevant for functionality, just like for us. And well, as I said, you can take this and just deploy this. Let's just try this, right? So we could do this, go in this folder here, do a Terraform init, and this should just work the same way. Well, it's nothing special. It's just Terraform code in JSON format, essentially. And what the CDKTF, diff would do is essentially like a plan, right? So it's taking this configuration, it's doing a plan, parsing the output a bit, giving some feedback here. Oh, this looks a bit funny, but yeah, like essentially it would say, okay, hey, this would create like a Docker container here, and when we actually do this, it will just do like a deploy, like an apply in the background to via the Docker provider. And technically, you don't have to do the synth explicitly. Mm-hmm. So to generate TypeScript into JSON. So since this would be done transparently when you do like a CDKTF deploy or diff or destroy. Yeah, and there we go. We did deploy something. I have no idea what it's actually supposed to do.
I thought it was an Nginx container that we were starting out with.
Right. I don't know if that works. Oh, actually, it does work.
Beautiful.
That's surprising. It's nice when things work.
Those are the best demos, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, that's like in a nutshell, that's really it, right? So you have the classes, and what we are using here is like the generated bindings or the generated classes for the provider. What we could also do is we could abstract this in our own way, right? So we could do, I don't know, let's call it HTTP server, and it extends a Terraform resource. No, I think it's just a resource. And then we build, like it would be sort of similar to a Terraform module, with the major difference that it doesn't really have its own namespace, right? Terraform modules are like a way to namespace your configuration somehow. So when you would do like the HTTP server module, you could duplicate the same, you could use the same name in the root module and in the HTTP server module, right? So how this works here, that's like a bit different. So we are just building out a tree of resources here. So when we take this, I don't really need this as a thing here. Why is it? Oh, super. Yeah. Then we have that.
And while you're getting this worked up, just wanted to point our audience to one of our Learn guides. We have a site called learn.hashicorp.com, which has guides and tutorials for all of our products. And specifically for the CDK, we have one with TypeScript and AWS. Let's get a link of that up in the show notes. Sorry, in the chat, actually. Also in the show notes, maybe. Who knows? So if you want to try CDK for Terraform out after this session, head on over there, and we've got step-by-step instructions on how to try things out and how to build things.
Yeah, right. So I'm just trying to make it work the way it was before. So we can do this, and then this. Whoop, whoop. And there we have the Docker image. So right, so that's essentially the same code with the only difference that we now have like our own construct, HTTP server, which is sort of the equivalent to like a Terraform module. But again, it's not a namespace, but it's well, we can look at this as just like another node in the tree, which we construct here. And let's see if that works. So, but what I'm trying to demonstrate here is like, this is something which you could ship within your organization, right? So you could take this, package it up as like an NPM package or like a Piper package or whatever it is, and distribute this construct, like the HTTP server construct, into your organization, and it would work in the same way. There's like an obsolete import here. Yep. And oops.
I like the inline test that's happening there in the linting.
Oh yeah, that's TypeScript. So just TypeScript checker here. Yeah, there you go. Right, so you have a div. It's a bit hard to read. I'm not sure, probably because the terminal is so big. I don't know. So, but what we see here is, oops, here's this zoom thing in the way. Yeah. So we see here, like it used to be, just like a plain name here. And now, like we derive the name from the position in the tree. And that's why you see here, like this HTTP server name now in the new Docker container. And it's like an implementation detail in the end. But that's, well, it would probably still work the same. Let's see if you're still lucky. When we deploy this.
Demos that work out always fascinate me. We did not rehearse this. This is not smoke and mirrors. It's beautiful.
Error. Unable Docker image. Blah. Okay,
well, this one makes sense. There's an existing image. This isn't necessarily a CDK error, but I can see how this slightly obstructs the flow. While you look at that, Daniel, question for you. We have the Terraform plugin for VS Code, but since we're not using HCL, how does this work? Do I need a special plugin to get the code to look nice, or should I just write nicer code?
I mean, you should probably just do it, perfectly in Vim without, needing the computer to highlight anything for you. But if you're not wired that way, one of the cool things about this project is, at the end of the day, you're just writing the language you already know how to write, that you already have your editor set up. And so if you're already set up and comfortable writing TypeScript, and you have your syntax highlighting dialed in and your formatting dialed in, this is just more TypeScript. it's just a library at the end of the day. And then you use the CDK CLI to apply it and create your infrastructure, which is the only sort of change to a normal programming workflow. But in terms of your editor setup, it's really easy to get started in whatever language you're already using, because you're not learning a new language, you're not setting up a new work environment. It's just more TypeScript or more Python or more Java or what have you.
That makes it a lot easier to hit the ground running. It's always my preference to do that versus just hitting the ground. And yeah, when you don't write perfect code, which happens to me ever so often, it is useful to have an IDE that catches bugs as you write them. So yeah, as one in our chat,
I can't really remove this. I don't know. So it's like some dependent image, something. So probably I built an image of this. I don't know. Anyway, in theory, this would just work. So that's more like a Docker setup problem on my end at the moment. But yeah, I think you get the idea. And yeah, and I mean the same would in theory work in Python. I mean the beautiful thing is, like, if you would package this up, like since it's written in TypeScript, you could take this, package it up as like a npm package essentially, and then use the JSI, the JavaScript interoperability interface, which is built by AWS and which is the thing which drives the polyglot packages which we have, like for the various languages. So, and you could generate Python, Java, and C# out of this code essentially, right? So you don't have to write this 4 times. You could drive the entire ecosystem with just TypeScript. And that's what we do for CDKTF itself, right? So we write this in TypeScript and we distribute it in all languages which we support. Otherwise, I think it wouldn't be really possible to do this. So like to actually write custom implementations for each target language would be quite an effort.
I can definitely see that. I believe you actually spoke about very related content during HashiTalks DACH in December.
Yes. Yeah. So,
I know that session was in German, but we'll get the link up in the chat so people who are fluent or want to learn a new language. I know one of our colleagues who's been practicing German actually stayed for the event to follow along. Super cool. Yeah, Polyglot Terraform, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I teamed up with Thorsten Stiller, who's like an engineer, I think, at Microsoft, or like a support engineer. I'm not really sure what his exact title is. And we did a talk together about Polyglot Terraform, Terraform CDK, and yes, was quite good. So he did a demo part for Azure. We also like demonstrated like a few of these abstractions. So I was talking like a bit more about the ecosystem and how it actually works and the implementations and stuff like this. So yeah, it was quite good, quite a lot of fun. So certainly, like if you're familiar with German, certainly check out this talk. And I think he did a similar talk at HashiTalks. Like, I don't know, like, when was it, in February or January? I don't know when it was.
Yeah, the one in February, Thorsten was there as well.
Yeah.
But of course, we want to highlight your talk. So another thing that you mentioned when we kicked off is you have been contributing to CDK for a long term. And before you joined HashiCorp, you had already been a contributor.
Yeah.
So I think our audience might not know, but you also write CDK Weekly.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, we are just transitioning this to CDK.dev, which is like sort of like an aggregation website for news and stuff. And so since it's quite a lot of effort to pick the different pieces and popping up each week, and like essentially CDK Weekly is, I think it started like roughly a year ago, and and I think was mostly on a weekly schedule except for the last 2 months or so. But yeah, it's quite interesting since there's like lots of content being produced and it's really gaining more and more traction. So it's quite interesting. But yeah, so I think there's a team assembling around CDK Weekly. So there will be more content over the next few weeks. So it's quite good. So the website is cdkweekly.com if you want to sign up.
Always very nice. And definitely worth subscribing if you are interested in what's happening in CDK land. On that topic, we also, well, not we, but you're working on CDK Day. And that's, I believe, is happening April 30th.
Yes, exactly.
Is the CFP for that still open? Can people submit if they have interesting sessions?
Yes, please. So I think it's open for another 10 days or so. But check it out on cdkday.com. So there's an open CFP. The ticket registration opened up as well. So you can, it's free. It's a free event run by volunteers. Yeah, it's gonna, like last year we did like this first iteration. It was quite a success, I would say. It was like, I think 3,000 people signed up, and like it peaked at like 1,000 live viewers or so. So it was really, well, quite a lot of traction. Yeah, and we hope to exceed the expectations from there. So let's see how we're going to do that. But yes, CFP is open, and yeah, we are looking for talks for CDK for Terraform, for AWS CDK, for CDKs, which is CDK for Kubernetes, Progen, which is sort of like a similar thing, for project configuration. So it's like the entire ecosystem runs this thing, like runs the CDK there. And yeah, and in particular, of course, like if you're a user of CDK for Terraform, we would really encourage you to submit to the CFP. So I'd really like to hear some stories about, some adventure stories about early users. So we did have like a few talks, like I think 2 talks or 3 talks, I'm not sure, including mine on the last CDK day, where like one of the really early users shared his experience with Python for CDK, like CDK for Terraform in Python. And I think all the talks from there are also on YouTube, so it's still possible to check them out.
I wanna offer there, if there's anybody listening who's sort of thinking, I've played with CDK for Terraform. I'm using it a little bit at work. I'm using it for play at home, and I'm kind of interested in giving a talk, but I'm not quite sure. Reach out to us, and sooner than later, because the CFP is only open another week and a half. I'm more than happy to talk. I've done plenty of conferences, speaking. Even if somebody has never ever spoken at a conference before, this is a pretty low barrier to entry, and it's a very friendly community. And we are super happy to help talk things through and get people prepared, get your demo tidied up, all of that. We'd love to help.
I like that. You're actually striking a chord there with a member of our audience who said they're interested in provisioning an EKS or K8s cluster using CDK, and they might submit an CFP. So that's good.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, that sounds awesome. I would love to see it. And if there's anything we can do to help there, reach out to me, reach out to Sebastian. We would love to talk.
Sebastian, you're Korfmann on Twitter. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome. We'll get a link to that up in our chat as well, and make sure it's actually linked with the video. So as always, if you're not watching this live, you are really missing out, because live means you get to ask questions and we'll answer them. We already figured out what good morning music is and how CDK works, 2 of the more important topics of today. And again, if you're watching live, you can get little nuggets like how do I do this? And why do I not need a plugin to get ID highlighting going? As a former practitioner, I just want to say, Daniel, thank you for offering that help, because submitting to an RFC, sorry, a CFP can be stressful. So when you get some guidance from the people that actually work on the product of things to highlight, it's always been super good. And more often than not, you build a relationship that makes it much more beneficial for everyone involved, because you get a practitioner who's got, you know, a passion clearly for something, because otherwise you wouldn't talk about it, right? Nobody's going to talk about stuff they don't like, hopefully.
And the truth is, we are genuinely interested. I am genuinely interested in hearing directly from everybody. One of the luxuries of an early stage project that I'm really enjoying about CDK for Terraform is we're at that early stage where we can directly one-on-one talk with a large proportion of our active users and can personally know everyone. I'm always happy to get into discussions with Terraform core users, but that project has done so well, I can't possibly know even 1% of active Terraform users. With CDK, for the time being, you know, everybody who's actively using it, everyone who's playing with it, I want to talk. I want to hear what you're doing. If you're being successful, even if you're not. If it's not working out, I want to hear why. If it is working out, I want to hear why. We are actively interested. We really want to talk with people. And so I want to emphasize there's not just for CFP, but just generally, like, we actively want to talk and get to know folks, and, you know, get a walkthrough of your code, see how you're doing it, see what you're trying to do. And there's a neat thing there. It's early enough that, you know, a handful of people asking for something and telling the same story can have a pretty substantial impact on the roadmap.
I like that. As a practitioner, I like influencing the roadmap, so it gets me the features I need. You know, usually that doesn't work out that way, but it's nice when enough people actually conclude that, hey, you know what, we really need that one feature. So that willingness to take feedback and actually do something with it, I like a lot. It makes me happy to hear that. We put Sebastian's link to Twitter up in the comments, so you can easily find him on Twitter.
Yeah,
and
just
Daniel,
let's just drop my work email in there. I'm always happy for people to reach out. Dreier at HashiCorp.com.
Awesome. We'll get that up there as well in a second. In the meantime, we've got 5 minutes left. So if you want to get your questions in, now is the perfect time. And while we wait for some questions to actually arrive, you know, YouTube internet delays. Sebastian, question for you. What are some of the biggest don'ts when using CDK? What should I definitely not do? And how can I, you know, have a great experience versus like, oops, I did something wrong here experience?
Probably the most surprising thing, in particular when you're using TypeScript, is that, well, due to the nature of how it's implemented and how it's all tied together internally, we don't really support async requests and async processes at the moment. There are always workarounds, right? So I mean, you can shell out to the different process and stuff. That's already working. But like in theory, where this touches on is like making your configuration depending on external sources, right? So that's like one of the theories behind this. So where you drive your like one of the things which we have in mind is like it should be predictable, right? So like when we do run a CDKTF synt, you should always synthesize the exact same configuration given the same input, right? I mean, the output might differ depending on your if-else construct which you do, but you don't really want to synthesize something different because, I don't know, your network is down, for example. So that's would be like a bit difficult. It's sometimes a bit difficult to work around this, or like to not do this. But in the long run, it's certainly better to stick to this, like to stick to predictable outcomes when you're running your CDKTF synth.
I like predictable outcomes. Predictable outcomes don't scare me at 3 a.m. And at the end of the day, that that's where your software is gonna end up being used. In all those beautiful situations where things can go wrong, whenever it's predictable, codified, much nicer.
I think that's one of the trade-offs for folks to consider between using HCL to drive Terraform versus using another language via CDK is, in terms of predictability, the whole point of HCL is to be pretty constrained, and HCL, it's sort of, almost the same philosophy as like Go, where the goal is it's all supposed to look the same regardless of what team writes it. There's not a whole lot of different ways to solve the same problems. And once you have full programming languages, you get more power and more flexibility. And it's like any programming language. You don't get sort of the supports of the forced simplicity of HCL. You can make it as arbitrarily complex as you want. In principle, you could tie it into your application stack and do your, but you shouldn't, right? And so you could make it highly dynamic. You probably shouldn't. And you get more levers to dial in complexity that should you do this? It's kind of more, there's in this side of the house, you get more opportunities you get more power, and along with that, more responsibility to organize your own code. And, this is something that application developers are used to. Is a case for any software development, but it's a trade-off. And so if you have one thing folks like about using HCL is if you have very junior folks, say, they'll be able to read the HCL the same way as a more senior person.
As somebody who came from the Node ecosystem before cross-training for operations, I definitely recognize that there was a lot more flexibility in those repositories versus in anything ops specific. Right. So I recognize that.
And this is like one of the things I think that's cool about this project is you can have big swaths of your code base in HCL. You can have a whole module that your, say, ops team writes in HCL and enforce that simplicity, and then just have, modules tactically where a specific team wants to use TypeScript, Python, what have you, without having to. And so you can make different trade-offs for different teams in terms of where simplicity versus complexity makes sense organizationally.
Right tool for the right job. I like it. Sebastian, any last thoughts you want to share with our group for today's session?
Yeah, sign up for CDK Weekly, join cdkday.com, and start experimenting with CDK for Terraform.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being here today. This was a ton of fun. I love the live demo. And like I said, even when the tiniest bits don't work out, the major part did work out. And that's cool because we didn't rehearse this, like there's no green screen editing happening. It either works or it doesn't, and it did mostly. So that was cool. Thank you for giving me some new insights into CDK and also for taking the time to answer our audience questions. We'll be back with you two in a future episode, but if you are wondering what our office hours are, and if you're in the audience, because I know you two already know, we do these regularly for all of our tools Terraform is usually on Thursdays because it's a Terraform Thursday, obviously. So thank you for sticking around. Thank you for asking beautiful questions.